In September 2022, Burkina Faso suffered its second coup d'etat in less than 9 months. Then 34-year-old army captain Ibrahim Traore seized power, ousting Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Damiba, who led a coup in January of that year, toppling former President Roch Kabore. Justifying why he was removing Damiba from office, Ibrahim Traore said in a televised address that the embattled head of state had failed to tackle the perennial problem of insurgency that has been hitting Burkina Faso in recent years. Now, when Ibrahim Traore was named as the leader of the coup plotters, certain observers pointed out his resemblance to Thomas Sankara. In addition to the Red Beret, Ibrahim Traore had several points in common with the national icon Sankara. Both of them are captains, both came to power at the age of 34, and both were perpetrators of a coup against the military which had itself come to power by force just 8 months earlier. In this episode of African Biographics, we cover the meteoric rise of Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traore. Ibrahim Traore was born in 1988 in Bondokui in the Mohun province of Burkina Faso. He attended primary school in his hometown and secondary school in Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second largest city. Unlike his predecessor Damiba and many other Burkinabe officers who embraced a military career as teenagers, Ibrahim Traore had a civilian background before joining the army. He moved to Ouagadougou, the capital, to study geology at the Joseph Kizebo University, with reports describing him as shy and rather reserved, but also very intelligent. As the valedictorian of his class, he chose to join the army rather than continue his university studies, and so in 2009, Ibrahim Traore joined the Georges Namoano Military Academy in Pau. This academy is a second-tier institution compared to the prestigious Kadiogo Military Academy, of which Thomas Sankara and the former President Damiba are alumni. Upon his graduation in 2012, Ibrahim Traore joined the artillery regiment of Kaya, and 2 years later, he was promoted to lieutenant. Ibrahim Traore quickly impressed his superiors and was sent for anti-aircraft training in Morocco. After serving in relatively junior positions in Burkina Faso's military, Traore's major breakthrough came in 2014 when he was deployed to Mali as a soldier under the United Nations peacekeeping mission program MINUSMA. In Mali, Traore cut his teeth fighting the jihadists and ethnic insurgents. According to various accounts, Traore showed bravery in the face of a complex attack by militants in the northern Timbuktu region. This was in 2018. The following year, he participated in a military operation codenamed Operation Otapuano in Burkina Faso's restive east for 7 months. Despite being touted as a major success, this operation resulted in only temporary withdrawal by militants from the region and a corresponding increase in attacks elsewhere in the country. Ibrahim Traore also served in a detachment of Makoye in the northern Sahel region at the so-called three-border zone of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, on the front lines against jihadist groups, and took part in several operations there. People who knew Traore at the time said that he exhibited leadership attributes including being willful, courageous, and close to his men. Ibrahim Traore was promoted to the rank of captain in 2020. Around the same time, however, he was among the young and destitute officers who couldn't help observing their superiors' inability to contain the jihadist threat in the field. Traore and his fellow officers were stuck between a rock and a hard place. One source recounted an incident that occurred in 2020 when the town of Basalogo in central Burkina Faso was on the verge of falling to jihadists. The highway into Basalogo was believed to have been mined, so Traore led his men on a commando trek across the countryside, arriving in time to free the town. At this point, I need to mention that the rebel insurgency has had grave consequences for the people of Burkina Faso. Jihadist-inspired terrorist groups are wreaking havoc in Burkina Faso's northern regions, controlling large swathes of territory, especially in the countryside beyond the reach of the central government. According to estimates, the government controls slightly over 50% of the country's territory, and the actual figure could be lower. Attacks by the Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims, also known as JNIM, an Al-Qaeda offshoot, and by the Islamic State Sahel have been on the rise in the Sahelian tri-border region among Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. JNIM in particular, which is based in Mali and active across much of West Africa, exploits a lack of opportunities as well as ethnic and social divisions among the populace to facilitate recruitment and build its influence in the region. JNIM funds itself by ransoming captives, taxing locals, smuggling weapons, and extorting human and drug traffickers. In Burkina Faso, the attacks by the jihadist groups include armed attacks, abductions, carjackings, improvised explosive devices, rocket attacks, and ambushes. The most affected regions in Burkina Faso are the Sahel, Nord, Central Nord, and the EST. By late 2021, a humanitarian crisis was evident in many parts of Burkina Faso, and a quarter of the population faced food insecurity. By mid-September 2022, more than 3,000 people had been killed, a third more than in all of 2021. Overall, some 2 million people have been displaced in Burkina Faso. In January 2022, a military coup led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba overthrew the civilian government of President Roch Kabore. President Kabore was elected in 2015 and re-elected in 2020 to replace President Michel Kafando, who led a transitional government following the 2014 popular revolution that ousted Blaise Compaoré. Blaise Compaoré ruled Burkina Faso for 27 years after taking power in the 1987 bloody coup that claimed the life of revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara. When Damiba took power, he cited President Kabore's inability to curb the Islamic insurgency plaguing Burkina Faso. Soon after taking power, Damiba instituted the Patriotic Movement for the Safeguard and Restoration, the MPSR, and vowed to reconquer the country by fighting the jihadist insurgents and helping the 2 million internally displaced people return to their homes. Captain Ibrahim Traore became a member of the MPSR as Damiba's junta chose to call itself. In March of 2022, Damiba promoted Ibrahim Traore to become the head of artillery in the Kaya regiment in the center of the country. But it was a move that ironically would sow the seeds of Damiba's own downfall. Unfortunately, during President Damiba's short time in power, attacks by militant Islamists increased in Burkina Faso as they seized territory in rural areas and encircled cities. Under this new government, little improvement was seen by many members of the military. Those stationed in remote areas often did not receive their pay on time. Captain Ibrahim Traore's regiment became a cradle of discontent, and Traore himself, tasked by his colleagues with channeling their frustrations, made several trips to Ouagadougou to plead their case with President Damiba. As the months went by, discontent with President Damiba continued growing among the troops. The soldiers still faced the same logistical difficulties and were suffering heavy losses. This is while Lieutenant Colonel Damiba and his entourage of air-conditioned officers sitting in their comfortable coup headquarters in the capital were accused of being out of touch with reality. Disillusionment at the response of Damiba's government turned into anger, which appears to have crystallized among the soldiers into resolve to seize power. Like the January push, the trigger was an attack on 26 September 2022 by jihadist forces on a 150-truck convoy loaded with food headed for Djibo, one of the main cities in the war-torn north. This city of 60,000 people had been under siege by terror groups for about 18 months. This attack on the convoy, which was claimed by an Al-Qaeda-linked group, killed 37 people, including 27 soldiers. In the army ranks, the frustration was palpable, especially among the youngest members. This defeat of the army was pinned on Damiba. A week earlier, he had mobilized a 70-strong delegation to attend the United Nations Summit in New York. There, President Damiba argued that his government was making some progress in the fight against terrorism, and he also asked for support from the international community. The trip to the United Nations Summit was perceived at home in Burkina Faso as wasteful and in total disregard of the dire insecurity situation of the country. In the days that followed, Captain Ibrahim Traore, on behalf of many aggrieved soldiers, went to Ouagadougou to speak with President Damiba. He asked for an audience with the president but never received an answer. Faced with what they saw as contempt, Traore and other officers of his generation decided to take action. At dawn on 30 September, gunfire rang out in Ouagadougou. The coup plotters had gone into action. It was around 8 p.m. local time when a military man in fatigues, bulletproof vest and red beret, surrounded by hooded and helmeted men, appeared on the Burkina Broadcasting Corporation, the RTB.
Unfortunately, our common ideal was betrayed by our leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandago Damiba, in whom we had placed our trust. Indeed, the deterioration of the security situation which justified our action has been relegated to the background in favor of unfortunate political adventures, far from liberating the occupied territories.
This man announced that Captain Ibrahim Traore was taking over as head of the patriotic movement for safeguard and restoration, thereby overthrowing Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Damiba.
Conscious of our historical responsibility, the patriotic movement for safeguard and restoration hereby commits all fighting forces to refocus on security and the restoration of the integrity of our territory. We reassure the international community that Burkina Faso will continue to respect its international commitments, including human rights.
Traore's junta also made clear its aims to diversify Burkina Faso's international partnerships in the fight against jihadism. As this particular coup unfolded, over the next 48 hours, Captain Ibrahim Traore and his men showed that they were not afraid of the heat and that they would not hesitate to play with fire. On 1 October, with their coup d'etat seemingly going off the rails, Traore and his officers went on national television to accuse Damiba of having taken refuge in the French military base of Camboinsin to prepare a counter-offensive. In a Burkina Faso, white-hot with anti-French sentiment, this announcement was a bombshell. Although the French government denied it, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso to attack the French embassy and the French Institute. So now, what initially started as a coup d'etat by soldiers turned into a popular insurrection to save the country from an alleged plot supported by France. During the night, several army corps, including the Air Force and some special forces, switched to Captain Ibrahim Traore's camp. The next morning, the case was heard and Damiba was forced to resign. At just 34 years old, Captain Ibrahim Traore was installed as transitional president of Burkina Faso.
In the red beret, Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso's new junta leader and self-appointed president. Thousands gathered in the capital in what seemed like a victory parade after Friday's coup. For the ousted Paul-Henri Damiba, grabbing power in the capital Ouagadougou proved easier than fighting armed groups in the north of the country, where soldiers face setbacks at the hands of armed groups linked to ISIL and Al-Qaeda.
Ever since Ibrahim Traore took hold of power, tensions have been running high with France, whose colonial rule of Burkina Faso extended from 1896 to 1960. Following the coup d'etat, hundreds demonstrated in Ouagadougou demanding the end of the French military presence, strongly contested in West and Sahelian Africa. In January 2023, Burkina Faso gave France 1 month to withdraw its troops as it ended a military accord that allowed French troops to fight insurgents on its territory, citing a wish for Burkina Faso to defend itself. The following month, in February 2023, the two countries, France and Burkina Faso, officially marked the end of French military operations in the West African nation after a flag-lowering ceremony at the French Special Forces camp. All of this fueled speculation that Burkina Faso would deepen security ties with Russia, like neighboring Mali, where Russian Wagner mercenaries were operating. In August of 2023, Ibrahim Traore held talks with a Russian delegation that included discussions on possible military cooperation. This was a follow-up to talks between Traore and Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Russia-Africa Summit that was held in St. Petersburg in July of the same year. While his fellow African presidents were dressed in their characteristic, custom-tailored expensive suits, Ibrahim Traore showed up in military combat clothing, complete with a red beret and tactical gloves. This has since become his trademark. Ibrahim Traore's speech during the aforementioned Russia-Africa Summit earned him plaudits, with some people calling him Sankara incarnate. The following is an extract from his speech. The problem is seeing African heads of state who bring nothing to people who are struggling singing the same song as the imperialists who call us militia. As a result, they end up referring to us as people who do not respect human rights. We, African heads of state, must stop acting like marionettes who dance each time the imperialists pull our strings. In his speech, Traore blasted African presidents who are happy to receive freebies. The extract from the speech continues, and I quote, "Yesterday, President Vladimir Putin announced that free grain would be shipped to Africa. This is pleasing and we say thank you for this. However, this is also a message to our African heads of state. At the next forum, we must not come here without having ensured the self-sufficiency of the food supply of our people. We must learn from the experience of those who have succeeded in achieving this." Don't be shy to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.